Throughout the mid-1950s, the bottom-of-the-range model for Gibson was the Les Paul Jr. That was really their student and beginner model. But in 1959, they decided there was some mileage to be had out of making an even more affordable guitar, and they introduced the Melody Maker. This is a 3/4 scale Melody Maker. They made this in a shorter scale. They also made it in the fuller sized Gibson scale, 24 3/4 inch length. This is the one with just a single pickup, basic wrap over bridge, 2 controls. It's a thinner body. It's still mahogany, but you know, it's just a little bit more affordably made overall. But it's still a glued-in neck guitar, and it's still a Gibson. And these guitars were the guitars that kids played for years and years in the garage and in their rock and roll bands. Carl here has got the model that they changed the Melody Maker 2 in 1962. It's called the Melody Maker D a lot of times. And that's the 2 pickup model. This is what they went over to in 1965. This one is from 1968 actually, but this is a nice cardinal red Melody Maker with 2 pickups, and the SG body style was working for them, so they'd had that out for a few years in the Les Paul and the SG in the early 60s. So they brought the Melody Maker out in the SG shape, and I think these are pretty cool little guitars. They've got a single coil pickup that looks a lot more like a Fender Stratocaster pickup, but they're made differently inside. They've got a different magnet structure and they're wound differently, so they sound different. It's you know, it's kind of not a bad sounding guitar for some, you know, garage rock or you know, rock and roll or punk or something, and people play all kinds of great music on these. If this is what they can afford out of a Gibson, people get a lot of mileage out of these things. You know, with little distortion, they got a really dirty, bitey kind of a sound to them. Another thing that reminds me that we haven't really mentioned much that we've seen on some of these Gibsons before, but they even went ahead and put the deluxe features on some of these, like a vibrato bar. And Gibson's vibrato bar here was a Maestro unit, they called it, and it changed form somewhat over the years, but always a much more basic kind of a thing than Fender had. Fender's Stratocaster vibrato was a highly developed tailpiece. This was really just a bent piece of steel that functioned as a spring, and the strings anchored in there, and you bent it like that. You didn't get a whole lot of action out of it, and it wasn't always great for tuning stability, but if you work with them and set them up right, you know, you can get a reasonable amount of vibrato action out of these things. Would you give us a little what you think of that thing, Carl? You've been playing that a little bit.
Yeah, this guitar is set up with really high action. So I decided to put a Coracedin bottle on here and try a little slide on it. But it actually sounds pretty good for slide.
Great. You make that sound like $1 million, Carl.
Or at least $250.
$250, yeah. The going rate for these Melody Makers for years and years, I think, was $100 or something, you know, the used ones. But, you know, there's a little market for these now, and as you can see, you can make them sound like good guitars, you know, and if this is somebody's starting point in a Gibson, you can still get some use out of the thing. Pretty cool sounding guitars. Another model that was a more affordable Gibson, but in the archtop range, was the ES-125. It had its origins in the ES-100, which goes way back to the big-bodied Gibsons. But in 1960, they made it into a thin line, but still entirely hollow body model. Carl's got one here. This one is from 1961, I believe. With just one pickup on this one. They made them also with 2 P90 pickups, but it's a single cutaway, entirely hollow, and it was a more affordable model, and they sold a lot of these in the 60s, but it was still made like a real Gibson, like a big boy guitar, you know, but it just had the dot neck, it had an unbound fretboard, and made a little more austere and more simply made, but still you know, they can be great guitars. You like that one, huh?
Yeah, this is great. This is kind of like, it's got a real earthy kind of tone to it. First of all, acoustically, I'm going to play it acoustically with a little bit of an amp. You can kind of dig into it, and that's just a great little sound there. The other thing is I would kind of use this guitar as a secret weapon, because it has this earthy, funky tone, you know, kind of wants to